After signing the divorce papers with my husband in silence, I immediately blocked all his financial access, including his debit and credit cards. One night, while he was celebrating a lavish $350,000 wedding with his mistress, the music suddenly stopped. In an instant, the ballroom fell silent, and that was when I appeared with a mysterious man. A single sentence from that man would destroy everything in an instant. Welcome to Martha's Stories. I share new life stories here every day, and I'd really appreciate it if you hit subscribe and liked my video. Drop a comment down below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you, right? Now, I read every single comment, and it helps me to know I'm not alone in this. The air in the mediation room of the Atlanta family court was exceptionally cold and tense, perhaps because the air conditioning was running at twice its usual power. On one side of the long, polished mahogany table sat a man dressed in a bespoke suit, radiating an air of unearned confidence. A victorious expression sat on his face, one he didn't even bother to hide. Leaning back in the plush leather chair, he looked with utter disdain at the woman sitting across from him. That woman was Lysandra, his wife, or rather his soon-to-be ex-wife. Lysandra sat in silence, her hands neatly crossed over her knees on top of her simple tailored dress. Her style, understated but undeniably high-end, framed an expressionless face. There were no tears, no flashes of anger, only a deep-seated calm that made it impossible for anyone to guess what she was thinking. They's lawyer slid a thick stack of documents toward Lysandra. The sound of the paper scraping against the wood echoed unnaturally loud in the quiet room. They, with a sarcastic smirk, began to speak, intentionally raising his voice so that everyone in the room could hear just how powerful he thought he was. He told her that deciding to divorce him was the greatest mistake of her life. He went on to say that she wouldn't survive in a city like Atlanta without him. He described her as a simple housewife who had lived a comfortable life only because of his hard work as the CEO of the company. According to Thier, Landry had no skills other than spending the money he earned. The words, filled with insults and overflowing arrogance, poured out of his mouth without restraint. Landry didn't interrupt him. She let him empty everything he had on his mind. Inwardly, she marveled at how money and status could transform the man she once loved into such a despicable stranger. She remembered perfectly how they had approached her years ago, how politely he had asked for her parents' blessing, parents who, at the time, were very skeptical of him. But now Thier acted as if the entire world was at his feet. Lysandra's lawyer tried to stop the torrent of words coming from Thier, but she held him back with a gentle wave of her hand. She wanted to hear it all. She wanted to burn this moment into her memory as a powerful reason never to look back. When they finished his triumphant speech, he slid his expensive gold fountain pen toward her, challenging her to sign the papers if she truly had the courage to live a difficult life. He added that he had no intention of giving her a single cent in the division of assets, and that he was sure she would come crawling back in less than a month begging for grocery money. Landry took the pen slowly. She glanced at the clauses in the document. Everything was going according to her plan. No property claims, no demands for shares. A pure, unconditional divorce. To Thier, this was an absolute victory. He felt he could now dominate all the assets he had been managing. To Lysandra, this was the key that opened the door to the trap she had meticulously set. The tip of the pen touched the white paper. With a firm, unwavering hand, Lysandra signed her name. The black ink put an end to their 5 years of marriage. The scratch of the pen sounded decisive, as if announcing that there wasn't a single shred of doubt left in her mind. After signing, she closed the document and pushed it back toward Thier's lawyer. The mediator, who had been watching the scene, could only sigh deeply, seeing the stubbornness of both parties in their own ways. Thayer grabbed the papers immediately, verified the signature with a wide grin, and let out a short He felt as if a massive weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He felt free. Free to have an open relationship with Vesper, free to enjoy the wealth that he believed was the fruit of his own sweat. Lysandra stood up, straightened her clothes briefly, and took one last look at Thier, who was already busy shaking his lawyer's hand, celebrating his false victory. Without saying a word to him, Lysandra turned and headed for the exit. Her steps were light, as if thousands of tons had just been lifted off her back. From behind her, Thier shouted that she shouldn't forget her way out as he wouldn't be giving her a ride. Lysandra didn't turn around. She opened the door to the mediation room, walked through the busy corridors of the courthouse, and reached the main lobby where a car was waiting for her. Outside the building, the Georgia sun was shining brightly, a stark contrast to the cold treatment she had just received from the... Lysandra climbed into a comfortable black sedan. She sat in the back seat and let out a long breath. Her personal driver, an older man who had served her family loyally for decades, asked politely if everything had gone well. Lysandra simply nodded in silence with a slight smile. She pulled a tablet from her briefcase. When the screen lit up, the logo of a prestigious private bank appeared, the bank where all her family's and the company's assets were held. Lysandra entered a double security code and scanned her fingerprint to log into the system as the primary administrator. On the screen, the financial diagram she had been quietly monitoring appeared clearly. She could see the personal accounts linked to various company accounts. For the past 5 years, they had held a secondary access card with an almost unlimited limit. He thought it was his personal account, but it was nothing more than a facility provided by Lysandra's family to make it easier for their son-in-law to manage the company. They had forgotten, or perhaps he was too arrogant to realize, that he had never been the primary account holder. All the assets, from the mansion they lived in to the cars in the garage and the platinum credit card he often bragged about, were linked to Lysandra's family estate account. Lysandra's finger slid across the tablet screen. She entered the user access settings menu. There was the name with the title of CEO and full access status. Lysandra pressed the modify button without the slightest hesitation and changed his access status. She selected the options to block all additional credit cards, freeze cash withdrawal access, and delink the digital token for company transfers. The system asked for a final confirmation with a warning that this action would paralyze all financial activity for the user. Lysandra firmly pressed the confirmation button. The screen processed the order for a few seconds, showing a spinning circle, and then displayed a large green check mark with the phrase, "Access permissions successfully." Revoked. Lysandra leaned back in the soft car seat. She closed her eyes for a moment, imagining what would happen next. They would be on his way to his freedom now, probably planning a massive party to celebrate this divorce. Lysandra knew her ex-husband well. He was the type of person who craved validation. He would undoubtedly flaunt his wealth to cover up the fact that he had just failed in his family life. Goodbye to a painful past, Lysandra whispered to herself. She was no longer the silent wife at home. She was the rightful owner of the business empire that they had been claiming as his own. The sedan went through the city traffic, taking Lysandra away from the courthouse. In the silence of the car, she opened the messaging app on her phone. There was a message from Mr. Zephaniah, a distant relative and a trusted advisor to her late father, who had been helping her oversee the company from the shadows. The message was brief, asking if Phase 1 was complete. Lysandra typed a quick reply confirming that the divorce papers were signed and the financial access was completely cut. She also added instructions for Mr. Zephaniah to prepare the next phase. The game had just begun, and this time Lysandra had total control of the chessboard. They walked out of the courthouse with a triumphant stride. He felt like a bird newly released from its cage. He immediately pulled out his smartphone and called the number he had contacted most lately. The name Vesper appeared on the screen. As soon as the call connected, Vesper's honeyed voice greeted him. They proudly announced that he was officially a golden bachelor. He told Vesper that Lysandra hadn't demanded anything, which meant that the entire company fortune and his personal assets were now safe in his hands. Vesper squealed with joy on the other end, praising the brilliance in the negotiation. In reality, he had no idea he was walking into a trap. Without wasting any time, Thayer suggested meeting Vesper to celebrate this historic day. They agreed to plan their wedding as soon as possible. They wanted to prove to the world and especially to Landry's family that he could be happy and successful without his ex-wife's shadow. He went to pick up Vesper in his luxury company car. She was waiting for him, perfectly dressed and ready to spend the money. Their destination that day was the most prestigious 5-star hotel in downtown Atlanta, a place frequented by moguls and high-ranking officials for their luxury weddings. Upon arriving at the hotel, the reception staff greeted them warmly. They, with his usual arrogance, asked to speak directly with the banquet marketing manager. He said he wanted to book the most expensive wedding package available for the earliest possible date. The hotel manager, a professional-looking middle-aged man, received them in his elegant office. He presented a catalog of high-end wedding packages. Vesper's eyes sparkled instantly when she saw photos of decorations filled with imported flowers and crystal chandeliers. Without hesitation, she pointed to the royal wedding package with a price tag of $350,000. And that was just for the space rental and basic catering, not including the additional decorations she wanted. They, wanting to impress his future wife, accepted Vesper's choice without haggling. He even made special requests for a premium menu and first-class service. The hotel manager smiled broadly as he calculated the total cost. He explained that to confirm the date and begin the urgent preparations, a minimum deposit of 50% was required, though full payment in advance was better to ensure priority. With a nonchalant air, they pulled out his leather wallet and extracted the black credit card that was the symbol of his social status. He dropped it onto the marble table with a confident clack. The hotel manager took the card politely and inserted it into the terminal on his desk. They smiled at Vesper, imagining how grand their party would be. But that smile slowly faded when the hotel manager frowned. The terminal emitted a long beep and spat out a small receipt with the word declined. The manager tried to run the card again, thinking there might be an issue with the magnetic strip or an unstable internet connection. But the result was the same. The terminal rejected the transaction. Thayer began to feel uncomfortable. He laughed awkwardly, saying that perhaps he had used the card too frequently and the chip was dirty or damaged. He pulled another credit card from his wallet, this time a platinum card from a different bank. He handed it to the manager, slightly nervous but trying to appear calm. The manager tried to process the transaction again. The seconds spent waiting for approval felt like hours and once again the terminal rejected it. Thayer's face began to turn red with embarrassment. Vesper looked at him strangely. Her smile had disappeared, replaced by unease. They rushed to provide an excuse, saying there must be a massive failure in the banking system or some system maintenance blocking all transactions. To save face, he finally pulled out the company checkbook he always carried in his briefcase. He knew that using company money directly for personal purposes carried a small risk, but as the CEO, he figured he could fix it later with the finance team. With a slightly trembling hand, he wrote a check for $350,000 and signed it. He handed it to the hotel manager, saying in a firm tone that this check would surely clear since it was from a major corporation's account. The hotel manager took the check, examined it for a moment, and nodded. He said he would process it immediately with the payment department. But since there was a VIP client, the venue reservation could be considered confirmed for now. They breathed a sigh of relief. He had overcome a small crisis. After the hotel, Vesper dragged the directly to jewelry stores and bridal boutiques. Her desire for shopping was insatiable. She chose a massive diamond ring and a gown by a famous designer. When trying to pay for the ring, a transaction that cost far less than the venue rental, they tried to use his personal debit card, but again, the transaction failed. The clerk at the boutique looked at him with pity. They truly started to panic. He tried to open the mobile banking app on his phone to make a transfer, but the app was inaccessible, showing a notification. Your account has been temporarily frozen. Please contact your branch. A cold sweat began to run down his temples. He made an excuse to Vesper, saying his phone must have a virus or had been hacked, causing an error in the bank app for security reasons. Vesper began to show irritation and suspicion, but they managed to convince her with sweet promises that tomorrow morning, after resolving all these technical issues at the bank, he would let her buy whatever she wanted. Today, Thayer had no choice but to take Vesper home empty-handed, except for the promise of the lavish party they had just booked. In the car, Thayer called his mother, hoping he could borrow some temporary cash, but his hopes were shattered by his mother's angry voice on the other end. She had already heard about Thayer and Lysandra's divorce from other relatives. Thayer's mother scolded him harshly for divorcing Lysandra, whom she had always considered a good daughter-in-law from a prestigious family. She refused to lend him money and told Thayer to solve his own problems like an adult. Frustrated, Thayer threw his phone onto the car seat. He felt as if the world was conspiring against him that day. He didn't realize that it wasn't a cosmic conspiracy, but the cold execution of Lysandra's plan. Meanwhile, back in the hotel manager's office, the man made a call after Thayer and Vesper left. With a respectful tone, he spoke. On the other end of the line was Lysandra's personal assistant. The hotel manager reported that Thayer had just given a company check to pay for the party. Lysandra's assistant gave specific instructions. Let the party preparations go ahead. Accept the check, but do not cash it until the day of the event to give Thayer a false sense of security. Lysandra wanted Theo to sink deeper into the trap of debt and sham-y. The hotel manager understood and hung up. The party would be held as planned, but not as a celebration of love, rather as the stage for the ruin of Thayer's arrogance. The morning after the dramatic day at the hotel, Thayer woke up with a knot in his stomach. The sun was peeking through the curtains of the luxury apartment he had just rented last month to live temporarily with Vesper. His head felt heavy, not from lack of sleep, but from the worry that his credit cards had suddenly stopped working the day before. He sat on the edge of the bed and rubbed his face roughly. He tried to convince himself that it was just a temporary glitch in the banking system. He was the CEO of a major company. It was impossible for a bank to block his access without warning. They grabbed his phone from the nightstand, hoping to see a message from the bank explaining the error, but there were no banking notifications on the screen. Instead, there was a message from Vesper, who had woken up earlier and said she was waiting for him in the lobby. She was anxious to continue with her wedding shopping agenda. They showered and got ready in a hurry. He put on his best shirt and his brand name watch to shore up his confidence, which was starting to waver. Going down to the lobby, he saw Vesper sitting comfortably, flipping through a fashion magazine. Vesper's face lit up when she saw Thayer. She immediately stood up and clung to his arm flirtatiously, reminding him of the long list of things they had to buy today. Vesper wanted to order designer shoes from overseas, a limited edition leather bag, and specially imported wedding favors. They smiled bitterly and nodded to all her requests while his mind calculated how he was going to pay for it all if his cards were still blocked. He decided to try his luck once more today, hoping the banking system had returned to normal. Their first destination was a luxury bag and shoe boutique in the most exclusive mall in Buckhead. Vesper walked into the store like a queen inspecting her kingdom. The clerks, experts in dealing with wealthy clients, greeted them immediately with kindness, offering them cold drinks and appetizers. Vesper, without hesitation, pointed out 3 bags, each priced like a new motorcycle. She also tried on several pairs of heels with crystal incrustations. They could only sit on the waiting sofa, his heart beating fast every time Vesper said, "I'll take this." The total for Vesper's shopping that morning amounted to hundreds of thousands of dollars in less than an hour. When Vesper signaled a clerk to take all the items to the register, Thayer felt a cold sweat run down his back. Reaching the counter, he pulled out his wallet in slow motion. He took out a platinum credit card, different from the one he had used at the hotel the day before, hoping this one from another bank wouldn't have problems. The clerk inserted the card into the terminal. Thayer held his breath, his eyes fixed on the small machine screen. The seconds passed very slowly. Then a painful short beep was heard. The clerk looked at them politely but with a glint of suspicion in his eyes. He informed him that the transaction had been declined due to a security code. They forced a laugh to hide his embarrassment. He made an excuse out loud so that Vesper and the other customers could hear, saying that his bank, for the security of premium clients like him, had probably restricted high-value transactions upon detecting suspicious activity. Vesper began to get irritated. She looked at him with an inquisitive gaze, as if asking what the point of being a CEO's wife was, if they couldn't even go shopping. Not wanting to lose face in front of his future wife and the clerks, they finally asked for the store's account number. He promised he would have his finance staff at the office make a direct transfer from the company account that same day. The store clerk seemed to hesitate, as their usual procedure was full payment on the spot for items taken immediately, but they pulled out his business card with the title of CEO. He assured the store manager that he was an important person and that the payment would be made, without fail, before the afternoon. Fearing to offend a potential client, the manager finally allowed them to take the items on the condition that they sent the transfer. Receipt within 3 hours. Leaving the boutique, Thayer felt a little relieved, but the burden on his shoulders was even heavier. He now had a debt in the form of a promised transfer that he had to resolve immediately. But Vesper wasn't satisfied. She dragged him to a luxury car dealership not far from there. Vesper insisted that he buy her a late-model sports sedan as a wedding gift. She wanted to arrive at meetings with her friends in a new car to show off. They, with his ego through the roof, couldn't say no. He thought that buying a car usually involved a leasing or financing procedure managed by a financial institution, so he wouldn't need to swipe a credit card on the spot. This, Thayer felt, was safer for his strange financial situation. At the dealership, they were greeted by a very enthusiastic salesman. They chose a deep red sedan that cost a fortune. He sat in the driver's seat, grabbed the leather steering wheel, and felt again the sense of power he so desperately needed. After a short test drive, Thayer sat in a glass room with the salesman to process the paperwork. Confidently, he presented his ID for the leasing data verification process. He was sure his credit history was spotless. After all his previous installments had been paid punctually through a direct debit system from the main account that he erroneously believed was his. The salesman smiled kindly at first while entering the data into the computer, but his smile slowly faded as he saw the results on the monitor. His face turned rigid and uncomfortable. He called his supervisor over to look at the screen. They whispered seriously, glancing sideways at They began to feel offended by the treatment. He tapped the table lightly, asking what the problem was, as he was a busy man. Finally, the dealership manager approached Thea. His face was no longer friendly. He explained coldly that Thayer's credit application had been automatically rejected by the central system. The reason: Thayer's name was on an internal financial group blacklist due to indications of frozen assets and ownership disputes. Thayer was left jaw-dropped. He got very angry, blaming the dealership system. He shouted that he was a CEO with a massive salary. It was impossible for him to be on a blacklist. The commotion attracted the attention of other visitors. Vesper, who was busy taking selfies next to the red car, stopped immediately and approached Thayer. She asked in an alarmed voice why he was shouting. They, now completely embarrassed, grabbed Vesper's hand roughly and told her they were leaving. He told her the service there was terrible and that they didn't deserve his money. In the car, Thayer wouldn't stop cursing, blaming everyone but himself. He was confused by the term ownership disputes they had just mentioned. In his panic, he finally called his secretary and the finance manager at the office. With a raised tone, he asked why all his financial access was blocked and why there was an asset freeze issue. On the other end of the line, the finance manager sounded confused and scared. He explained that since that morning, the financial access token Thayer used was no longer valid. The bank had notified them that there had been a change in the user permission structure by the majority shareholder. They went silent. Now he realized that he had never held the majority stake. That stake belonged to Lysander's family, but he never imagined she would act so drastically and so quickly. He tried to deny that reality. He ordered the finance manager to immediately issue a cash check and send it to his personal account to cover his urgent needs. But the finance manager politely refused, fearing to violate the strict new procedures. Amidst Thayer's confusion and panic, a thick, cream-colored envelope landed on the desk in Lysandra's office at the headquarters, a place they had rarely visited. Zandra was sitting, reviewing reports on her tablet. Her personal assistant politely handed her the envelope. It was an invitation to Thayer and Vesper's wedding. The design was very lavish with gold ink and imported paper, exactly Vesper's wasteful taste. Lysandra opened the invitation slowly. There was no sadness on her face, but rather a slight, meaningful smile. Inside was the date and location of the party, which would be held in 2 days. Lysandra took a pen and wrote a single word on the RSVP card: attending. Then she handed the card to her assistant to send back to the address. Lysandra knew her attendance wouldn't be as a guest, but as the executive who had put an end to this long farce. The day Thayer and Vesper had been waiting for finally arrived. The wedding day, planned with excessive extravagance to prove their social status, now felt like a ticking time bomb for Thayer. Since morning, he had been at the hotel. He hadn't been able to sleep, haunted by messages from various vendors demanding payment. The suit boutique insisted on the transfer receipt that never arrived. The jewelry store threatened to repossess the merchandise, and the decoration company demanded full payment of the balance before the event began that night. They felt as if he were standing on quicksand. The more he moved, the deeper he sank. He kept lying to everyone, saying the money was in the process of banking clearance and would arrive that very afternoon. Meanwhile, the atmosphere in the hotel's ballroom was a hive of activity. Staff were installing thousands of fresh flowers brought in from out of state. A magnificent crystal chandelier was already in place, reflecting a dazzling golden light. A thick red carpet stretched from the entrance to the altar, designed like a fairy tale palace. Vesper seemed very happy. She was busy giving orders to the staff, asking them to change the flowers in one corner or dim the lights in another. She had no idea of the storm brewing in her future husband's mind. For Vesper, today was the day of her total victory over Lysandra. She would become the rightful wife of a CEO and live a life of opulence. She even imagined the envious faces of her friends when they saw the luxury of the party. Thayer had hidden in one of the hotel rooms rented for the bride's preparations. He paced nervously back and forth. He called his mother again, hoping the old woman had changed her mind and would lend him her retirement savings to plug this hole. But the call went unanswered. They slumped onto a sofa. He looked at the ceiling of the room, wondering how everything had gone wrong so fast. He remembered Lysandra's face in the courthouse, calm, expressionless. Suddenly, a sinister premonition overcame him. Had Lysandra planned something? But they quickly dismissed the idea. To him, Lysandra was too weak and naive to do something so cruel. He convinced himself that this was purely a technical bank problem and that tomorrow everything would return to normal. All he had to do was hold out tonight with his head held high. In another much quieter place, Landra was getting ready. She was at a private family estate, cozy and silent. No panic, no fuss. Landry was sitting in front of an antique teak vanity. A trusted family makeup artist was applying makeup that gave her a natural but strong look. Lysandra didn't want to look exaggerated. She didn't want to compete with the bride in gaudiness. She wanted to appear as herself, dignified, elegant, and unreachable. Lysandra chose a long silk dress of an intense black color, matching a satin scarf of the same color fastened with a diamond brooch that had been an heirloom from her grandmother. Her appearance radiated a mixture of mourning and imposing power. After getting ready, Lysandra walked toward the living room where Mr. Zephaniah was waiting for her. The middle-aged man wore an impeccable suit. Mr. Zephaniah looked at Lysandra with a mixture of admiration and concern. He knew how much the betrayal had hurt Landra for years, and he also knew how heavy the step she would take that night would be. In a grave voice, Mr. Zephaniah asked if Lysandra was sure she wanted to do this in public. He offered her other options, like letting the lawyers and the police handle their without her having to attend the party. Mr. Zephaniah feared that Lysandra would be hurt seeing her ex-husband at the altar with another woman. Lysandra smiled slightly and shook her head in silence. She adjusted her cuffs and said in a very calm tone that the pain in her heart had healed a long time ago, that going there wasn't to lament her fate, but to ensure that justice was served by her own hands. Lysandra wanted to see the moment Thayer's mask crumbled. She wanted him to know that the woman he had underestimated all this time was the same one who could destroy him in an instant. Hearing that response, Mr. Zephaniah nodded understandingly. He didn't object further. He offered her his arm to hold on to. They went out and headed for a gleaming luxury black sedan waiting in the driveway. The car's engine roared softly, ready to take them to the battlefield. Back at the hotel, the sun set and the guests began to arrive. A line of luxury cars dropped off guests at the main lobby. The front of the ballroom began to fill with guests composed of Thayer's business partners, Vesper's high society friends, and some distant relatives. They admired the lavish decoration. Food and drinks began to be served by waiters in impeccable uniforms. Beautiful orchestral music filled the space, creating a romantic and elegant atmosphere. Thayer and Vesper were already at the altar, greeting each guest. They forced a smile onto his face, although his eyes kept scanning the room with unease, fearing that some creditor would burst in and cause a scene. Vesper whispered to the, praising how wonderful the party was and how many important guests had attended. They only nodded rigidly. He saw the hotel manager standing in a corner near the kitchen entrance, watching him with piercing eyes, a clipboard in hand. They knew the manager was waiting for the payment. Every time their gazes crossed, Thayer quickly looked away, pretending to greet a guest. His heart beat fast. To the rhythm of the accelerating music, he felt the spacious and well-air-conditioned venue suddenly become cramped and hot. Exactly at 8 in the evening, the main event was about to begin. A famous host hired at a high price was already on stage, ready to lead the ceremony. The guests sat at their round tables enjoying the appetizers. The atmosphere was very lively, with laughter and light conversation everywhere. No one noticed the tension the groom was feeling. Outside the main door of the ballroom, which was firmly closed, a black sedan pulled up. A valet rushed to open the door. A pair of feet clad in gleaming shoes and high heels stepped out of the car. Landra stood in front of the hotel entrance, gazing at the magnificent building. Beside her, Mr. Zephaniah adjusted his suit. They looked at each other for a moment at tea and nodded. Lysandra moved forward with a firm step. It wasn't the arrival of a late guest. It was the beginning of the end for Thea. The heavy large doors of the ballroom were the only barrier between the fake party being held inside and the painful truth that was about to burst in. The wedding party inside the hotel ballroom had reached the height of its splendor. The sound of silver against expensive porcelain plates mingled, creating a background rhythm for the guests' conversations. Hundreds of people from the city's high society enjoyed the sumptuous food laid out buffet style on both sides of the room. The aroma of roasted meats, sweet cakes, and fresh flowers combined into a fragrance of luxury that delighted the senses. In the center of the room, a 7-tier wedding cake rose majestically, decorated with intricate sugar ornaments and handmade edible flowers. Everything seemed perfect, at least in the eyes of the guests who were unaware of the financial drama strangling the groom. They stood next to that massive cake with a crystal glass in one hand containing an expensive, champagne-colored, non-alcoholic carbonated drink. He looked at the room with mixed feelings. On one hand, his ego felt satisfied seeing so many important people attend his party: business partners, competitors, and even Vesper's high society friends who had previously ignored them. Tonight, the felt he had proven himself to be a little king in his own kingdom. But on the other hand, the shadow of unpaid bills continued to haunt him. He saw the hotel manager standing rigid near the kitchen entrance, his eyes following his every move like a jailer watching a prisoner. They tried to ignore that gaze. He took a sip of his drink to moisten his throat dry from the attention. The young host in his impeccable suit and characteristic gray voice stepped onto the main stage. He politely asked for the guests' attention. The volume of the background music, which until then had been quite loud, decreased. The host announced that it was time for the groom to give a short speech, a few words of gratitude, and a celebration of his new life. Enthusiastic applause echoed throughout the room. Vesper, standing next to Thea in her gleaming wedding dress with a long train, smiled widely and nudged him, whispering for him to give a great speech to impress everyone. They nodded, adjusted his tie, and walked toward the lectern with a microphone located in the center of the altar. He took a deep breath to gather what remained of his confidence. He clung to the lectern as if it were his only support at that moment. He began to speak. His voice trembled a little at first, but gradually it became stronger and more confident. He greeted the guests and thanked them for their presence. Then his speech went beyond a simple thank you. They began to tell the story of his success, or rather the version he had fabricated in his own mind. He spoke of how he had built his career from scratch, of how he had worked day and night to grow the company he now led. He described himself as a tenacious visionary who had conquered the tough world of business without anyone's help. The guests listened attentively. Some business partners who knew the company's history whispered quietly, doubting theirs claims, but they still applauded politely. They, emboldened by the audience's reaction, moved on to a more personal topic. Without directly mentioning Lysandra's name, he began to drop hints about his past. He said that for years he had been held back by a domestic environment that didn't support his ambitions. He described his ex-wife as a rigid figure without vision, unable to keep up with his lifestyle and progressive thinking. Thayer said he needed a partner who was an engine, not a drag. He said that living with someone who wasn't on his level either in mindset or appearance was torture for a successful man like him. Vesper, standing behind him, smiled triumphantly. She felt flattered, thinking all those implicit praises were directed at her. They turned to Vesper and held his hand. She stepped forward and took it. They continued his speech, praising Vesper to the skies. He described her as a modern, intelligent, beautiful woman who understood the needs of a business leader. "Tonight," Thayer exclaimed into the microphone, "is proof that I have found my soulmate, a woman who deserves to be by my side at the peak of success." He ended his speech by asking all the guests to raise their glasses and toast to a bright future. With Vesper and the business empire, they would build together, to a future without limits, to freedom and true success. Thayer shouted, his face flushed with euphoria. The guests raised their glasses in unison and cheered. They felt on top of the world. For a moment, he forgot the rejected credit cards and the threats from the finance company. He felt invincible. But just as the cheers died down and Thayer was preparing to step off the stage to cut the cake, something strange happened. The spotlight illuminating him suddenly flickered once and then began to slowly dim. At first, they thought it was part of a dramatic effect prepared by the wedding organizer. He smiled, waiting to see what surprise would appear. But the dimming was different. Not only the stage lights, but also the large crystal chandelier in the center of the ballroom, dimmed until it almost went out. The space previously bright turned gloomy, creating an atmosphere of confusion. The orchestral music, which was flowing beautifully, suddenly stopped. Not by the conductor's order, but because the lights in the musicians' area went out completely, preventing them from reading their scores. The guests began to mutter. The confused whispers began to sound like the hum of an angry swarm of bees. They signaled the light technician in the corner of the room to turn them back on, but the technician seemed busy manipulating his control panel with a look of panic. In another corner, the hotel manager was speaking into a walkie-talkie with a very serious expression, but he didn't seem as scared as the technician. He seemed calm, as if he expected this to happen. He gave a short instruction and then looked directly toward the stage, directly into Thier's eyes. It wasn't the look of respect toward a VIP client. It was the cold gaze of an executioner who had just received the order to fire. They felt a chill. He tried to speak into the microphone again to calm the guests, saying it was just a small technical problem. "Ladies and gentlemen, please stay calm. The hotel's emergency generator is probably kicking in. One moment, please," Thier said with a forced smile, but his voice wasn't heard. The microphone in his hand was completely dead. The entire sound system of the room had been deactivated. An unnatural silence took over the large room. The guests' laughter and conversations faded slowly, replaced by a growing curiosity and tension. Vesper pulled hard on Thier's arm. "Babe, what's going on? You said this hotel was the best. How can the lights and sound fail? Don't embarrass me," she snapped in a petulant voice. They didn't respond. He was busy tapping the head of the silent microphone. In the gloom, as the emergency wall lights began to turn on, everyone's attention suddenly shifted not toward the stage, but toward the main door of the ballroom located at the back of the room opposite the altar. The enormous carved teak double doors began to open slowly. No one was pushing them. It seemed they moved on their own by an automatic mechanism that had just been activated. The creaking of the heavy hinges echoed in the silent room, drawing all eyes. A draft of cold air entered from the corridor outside, bringing with it a sensation much more chilling than simple darkness. The gigantic doors were now completely open, revealing the silhouettes of two people standing on the threshold, silhouetted by the bright light from the outer corridor. The contrast of the light made their figures seem dramatic, like heroes or perhaps villains appearing in the last act of a play. The silent ballroom seemed to hold its breath, no guest read to speak. All eyes were fixed on those two figures. Slowly they began to enter. The sound of their steps on the hard marble floor was clear and rhythmic. Clack, clack, clack. The decisive sound of high heels mingled with the heavy step of a man's shoes, creating a threatening rhythm that broke the silence. The woman was Lysandra. She wore a very elegant outfit, completely different from the simple appearance they was used to seeing at home. Her long dress was of a dark velvet that absorbed the light, giving her a mysterious and majestic air. Her scarf was impeccably arranged, framing her calm face from which emanated a cold and piercing aura. She wore no excessive jewelry, only an antique brooch on her left chest, but her mere presence seemed more valuable than all the gold decoration in the room. Beside her walked a middle-aged man with an imposing posture and enormous dignity. It was Mr. Zephaniah. He wore a tailored European-cut suit that fit him perfectly, and his hair was combed back, highlighting Hayes' firm and experienced face. As they moved into the room, guests near the entrance instinctively moved aside, creating a wide aisle through the crowd. Several older guests, veteran businessmen from the city, seemed surprised. They recognized the figure of Mr. Zephaniah. The whispers began again, but this time with a tone of awe and respect. "Isn't that Mr. Zephaniah from the Sterling Group?" a man whispered to his wife. "What is a mogul like him doing at Thier's party?" another asked. "And who is the woman beside him? It can't be his wife." "That woman is Thier's ex-wife," exclaimed another guest who recognized Lysandra. A wave of shock spread quickly among the guests, but Lysandra and Mr. Zephaniah walked tall, their eyes fixed on the altar stage. They, standing on the poorly lit stage, squinted, trying to recognize the unwanted guests. When the emergency light clearly illuminated Lysandra's face, Thier's heart seemed to stop for a moment. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. The woman he had just divorced and whom he had insulted in his speech, Lysandra, was now entering his party on the arm of a stranger with her head held high. Shame, anger, and confusion mingled in Thayer's chest. But what scared him most was the man next to Lysandra. They had seen that face in international business magazines and in a photo hanging in the lobby of the headquarters. It was Mr. Zephaniah, a legendary figure who controlled many large corporations, including the company Thayer worked for. He had never met him in person, as his rank was considered too low to attend meetings with the majority shareholder, Vesper, who didn't know who Mr. Zephaniah was and didn't care about his imposing presence, burst into anger immediately. She felt her moment had been ruined. She grabbed another microphone from the lectern table, hoping it would work, but it was also dead. Finally, she shouted in a sharp voice that broke the tension, "Hey, who let this common woman in? This is a private event, security. Where is security? Get these people out of here right now." Her shout sounded harsh and classless, making several guests frown, disgusted by the bride's behavior. They, realizing the situation was dangerous, tried to calm Vesper, but she was already out of her mind. She pointed her finger at Landra's face from a distance. Several security guards in black uniforms who were standing at the edges of the room moved, but not to eject Landra. Instead, they formed a barrier on both sides of the path where Landra and Mr. Zephaniah were passing, as if they were escorting VIP guests. Vesper was left speechless seeing the scene. "Are you deaf? I told you to get them out." "I'm the one who pays you," Vesper shouted again, her voice starting to sound hysterical. The head of security directed an expressionless look at her before looking forward again, completely ignoring the bride's orders. Landry didn't care about Vesper's shouts at all. She didn't stop, didn't turn, didn't even blink. To her, Vesper's shouts were background noise of no importance. She and Mr. Zephaniah continued walking until they reached the front of the stage, right in front of the main round table designated as the VVIP family table. It was the table where Thayer's parents and Vesper's should have sat. But since Vesper's parents were in the restroom and Thayer's mother had refused to attend, the table was currently empty. Mr. Zephaniah, with a chivalrous gesture, pulled out a chair and invited Lysandra to sit. Landra sat elegantly, leaned back, and placed her bag on the table. Mr. Zephaniah sat beside her. As soon as they sat down, as if it were a signal, a high-ranking waiter rushed over with a tray containing 2 glasses of high-end mineral water and placed them very carefully in front of them. The waiter made a deep bow, much more respectful than the one he had given Thayer earlier. This scene made the tremble even more. His knees buckled. He realized that in this hotel, the supreme power wasn't held by the one renting the venue, but by the owner of the building. And the hotel staff's gestures made it clear to W. whom they owed loyalty. Again, silence took over the room. No music, no clinking of plates. All the guests waited to see what would happen next. Lysandra raised her glass of water, took a sip in silence, and then looked up at the on the stage. Her gaze wasn't that of a betrayed and angry wife. It was the compassionate gaze of a boss toward an employee who was about to be fired. They felt naked under that gaze. He wanted to flee, but his feet seemed glued to the stage floor. Mr. Zephaniah stood up slowly. He didn't shout. He simply raised his hand slightly to give a signal. Magically, the main spotlight that was previously off turned back on. But only one light and its beam didn't illuminate the couple, but directly Mr. Zephaniah. Mr. Zephaniah reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a silver wireless microphone, the only one, working in the room because his team had brought it. He pressed the on button and a small pop was heard, indicating that the sound system had been taken over. "I'm sorry to interrupt your teal party." Mr. Zephaniah's voice was grave, clear, and imposing, echoing through the main speakers to all corners of the room. "It seems there has been a small misunderstanding in Mr. Thayer's speech a moment ago. He spoke of building the company from scratch, of his self-made success." Mr. Zephaniah let out a small laugh that sounded very dismissive. He walked calmly toward the stage stairs while they backed up step by step, terrified. "Perhaps it's time to inform the guests who the real architect of the kingdom you claim is and who has simply been a parasite living under it." Vesper, who still didn't understand the situation, tried to snatch the microphone from a trembling Thayer, but he stopped her. "Don't do it, Vesper. Stay still," the whispered in a broken voice. His face was pale as a corpse's. He recognized Mr. Zephaniah's voice. He recognized that authority. He knew his presence wasn't to celebrate, nor was it to ruin the party in a childish way like throwing water or pulling hair. His presence was for a publicity execution. And they, on the magnificent stage he had rented with a bad check, felt like a defendant waiting for his death sentence in front of hundreds of witnesses. Every step Mr. Zephaniah took up the altar stairs felt incredibly heavy and slow, like a judge's gavel in a courtroom. They backed away step by step, his face pale as paper, a cold sweat soaking his forehead, ruining his expensive hairstyle. He wanted to call security, but the voice got stuck in his throat. Besides, he realized that the building security was no longer on his side. Behind Vesper still stood with an expression of confusion and anger. She still didn't quite grasp the imminent danger. She was only upset because an unknown older man had interrupted her moment of triumph. Vesper tried to move forward to insult Mr. Zephaniah, but they quickly extended an arm to block her. He knew who the man in front of them was and that confronting him publicly was suicide. Mr. Zephaniah was now right next to Thayer in the center of the stage. The contrast between the two men was absolute. They, in his expensive groom suit, seemed small and scared. Mr. Zephaniah, in his conservative business suit, looked like a giant dominating the room. He didn't speak immediately. He let the silence linger for a few seconds, allowing the tension to seep into everyone's mind. He looked at with an indecipherable expression, not of explosive anger, but of disdain, as if there were a small insect lost in the wrong place. Then Mr. Zephaniah turned toward the thousands of guests still frozen in their seats. He smiled slightly, a polite smile, but without joy in his eyes. With a deliberate gesture, he raised his left hand and snapped his fingers toward the control room at the back of the hall. A moment later, the gigantic projector screen installed on the wall behind the altar lit up. That screen was supposed to show a slide presentation of Thayer and Vesper's romantic wedding, photos from overseas with love music in the background. But what appeared weren't tender photos, but a very complex and detailed business organizational chart. The words Vandross Family Holding were at the top in large gold letters. The guests squinted, trying to read the smaller letters underneath. Several businessmen sitting in the front rows covered their mouths with their hands. So surprised were they by what they saw, Mr. Zephaniah began to speak into the microphone again, his voice echoing clear and firm in every corner of the room. He explained that there had been many misunderstandings about who really steered the great ship. That was the company where they worked. Mr. Zephaniah pointed to the screen with his finger. At the top of that organizational chart, in the position of chairwoman and majority shareholder, was a name very familiar to the but unknown to most of the guests who only knew him superficially. The name was Lysandra. Yes, the woman sitting at the VVIP table quietly drinking her mineral water was the legal owner of 90% of the shares of the holding company that controlled the subsidiary where they worked. Mr. Zephaniah moved his finger down the organizational chart past the board of directors, the operations managers, until stopping at a small box in the lower middle. There, next to the title Managing Director by Contract, was Thayer's name. Mr. Zephaniah read the text in a mocking tone, repeating and emphasizing the phrase, by contract. He explained to the guests that Thayer's position was neither that of owner nor founder, nor even of the person responsible for strategic decision-making. Thayer was simply an employee who had been given a flashy title due to his marital status with the owner. He was only a mannequin displayed in the window to maintain the family image, while all important business decisions were actually made by the board of directors under Lysandra's orders. Thayer's face turned red with shame. His secret had been exposed in front of hundreds of people. He had always bragged about being a self-made CEO, the brain behind the company's success. Now everyone knew he was just a lucky employee who had married the boss. The whispers among the guests grew louder. They began to laugh at their own stupidity for having believed the lies. Vesper, who had her eyes fixed on the projector screen, felt her knees weaken. She looked at with horror. Her dream of becoming a mogul's wife had shattered in an instant. She realized Thayer had lied to her about the extent of his power. Unable to bear such humiliation, Thayer tried to defend himself. He snatched the dead microphone from Vesper's hand and shouted with all his might. Although his voice wasn't amplified by the speakers, he shouted that the organizational chart was fake. He shouted that he had worked day and night, that he had brought clients and profits to the company. He claimed that assets like the luxury mansion, the sports car, and the apartment were the fruit of his own sweat, bought in his name. They tried to convince the guests that this was a malicious slander from a spiteful ex-wife. He pointed at Lysandra with a trembling finger, accusing her of sabotage out of jealousy at seeing him happy with Vesper. Mr. Zephaniah laughed lightly upon hearing Thier's pathetic defense. He gave another signal to the operator. The image on the projector screen changed again. This time, it showed a list of the assets Thier had just claimed. On the screen appeared clearly the deeds to the house, the luxury car registration documents, and the apartment's title of ownership. But in the legal owner column, there wasn't a single mention of Thier's name. All the assets were in the name of Vandross Family Trust or in Landry's personal name. Mr. Zephaniah, as if teaching a child, patiently explained that all the luxury facilities Thier had enjoyed over the last 5 years, from the watch on his wrist to the car he used to pick up Vesper, were company assets lent to him as a convenience of his position. There, you possess nothing. Mr. Zephaniah's voice cut through the shouts, cold and sharp. Even the suit you're wearing was charged to a company Read It card that was blocked this morning. You're just a stowaway who sat so comfortably in first class that he forgot he never bought a ticket. Mr. Zephaniah approached Thier more closely, threatening him with his imposing physique. They backed up until his back hit the altar table. He was trapped. He had nowhere to run. Unable to bear the situation any longer, Vesper began to cry hysterically. She felt completely cheated. She shook Thier's arm, demanding an explanation. What is all this? You said the house was yours. You said the company was yours. So I was about to marry a simple employee, Vesper shouted, no longer caring about appearances. They tried to calm her, whispering that he would fix everything later, that they could sue Lysandra, but Vesper abruptly pushed his hand away. Her makeup, run by tears, made her look disheveled and pathetic on that magnificent stage. Below, Lysandra still sat in silence. She didn't smirk or mock. She simply watched the drama on stage with an expressionless face. Inside, she felt a sense of relief. The burden of lies Thier had been covering up had finally been lifted. Lysandra remembered how many times Thier had belittled her in meetings with friends, saying she knew nothing of business when in reality it was she who quietly fixed the administrative messes he created, who injected personal funds when his projects failed. Tonight, Lysandra had only reclaimed the truth that belonged to her by right. Mr. Zephaniah focused again on Thier. He said this humiliation hadn't ended yet. He reminded him of the document he had signed that morning in the family court. They frowned, trying to remember the content of that document. He remembered signing it hurriedly, anxious to be free. He remembered his lawyer telling him it was a standard divorce agreement with no property claims. They wondered what that divorce agreement had to do with this situation. Mr. Zephaniah, as if he could read his mind, pulled a navy blue folder from his suit. He held it high for everyone to see. You probably thought this was the end of your marriage, Thier, but in reality it's the beginning of your financial ruin, Mr. Zephaniah said enigmatically, preparing the final blow that would bury Thier alive. The atmosphere in the hotel ballroom changed drastically. If before it seemed like a shameful circus show, now it felt like a tense execution chamber. The guests held their breath, their eyes fixed on the navy blue folder Mr. Zephaniah was holding. They looked at the folder with overwhelming anxiety. His heart was beating so hard it seemed it would jump out of his chest. He tried to remember every clause he had glanced at that morning, but his brain, gripped by panic, blocked. He felt he had missed something very lethal hidden in the stack of legal documents he had ignored. Mr. Zephaniah opened the folder with a deliberately slow movement, torturing the mind. The sound of the pages turning was amplified through the microphone, creating a dramatic and eerie effect. He pulled out a sheet of letterhead paper with Thier's signature clearly visible in black ink, still fresh at the bottom. Zephaniah held the paper with both hands, read it in silence for a moment, and then looked directly into Thier's eyes. His gaze was full of illegal and irrefutable certainty. Mr. Zephaniah began to explain that in the world of high-level business, every signature has consequences, and reading a contract negligently is an unpardonable sin. Mr. Zephaniah's voice broke the silence, you were too arrogant in signing this document. Did you think you were casting Lysandra out of your life? Did you think you had won by waiving your rights to the division of assets? Mr. Zephaniah shook his head slowly. A smile of insulting compassion drew on his lips. Unfortunately, didn't you read Clause 14, Paragraph 3 of the Waiver of Rights Agreement you voluntarily signed? They was left wide-eyed. What clause was that? His lawyer hadn't said anything to him about a Clause 14. Thayer looked toward the exit, hoping to see his lawyer there to defend him, but there was no sign of him. He was alone. Mr. Zephaniah brought the microphone to his mouth, preparing to deliver the sentence that would be the hammer on Thayer's life. His voice became more grave and serious. "Listen well, Thayer, and all of you who are witnesses," Mr. Zephaniah said out loud. He took a brief breath before continuing. "Your signature this morning wasn't just for a divorce. It was a consent for the activation of a full indemnification clause, which states that if the second party, meaning you, renounces their status as the spouse of the majority shareholder, all company losses incurred during your tenure and all personal expenses that used company, facilities without written approval will immediately become a personal debt repayable within 24 hours." The sentence echoed, bouncing off the walls of the hall, entering Thayer's ears and exploding in his brain. He staggered backward as if he had been given a heavy slap. His legs gave out and he collapsed onto the hard stage floor. He struggled to comprehend the words, personal debt, all company losses. They knew very well that many of his projects had failed because he had been busier playing golf and on vacation than taking care of the business. The sum of those losses could amount to millions of dollars. And the $350 URI for the cost of tonight's party. That, too, would be considered an unauthorized expense, as Lysandra had blocked his access before the transaction. Mr. Zephaniah hadn't finished yet. He continued his explanation with an even more pressing tone. "According to the forensic audit we conducted last week, the total loss from failed projects and diversion of operating funds for your lifestyle during the last 5 years amounts to $7 million. And if we add the cost of the venue rental and tonight's catering that you charged to an already blocked company account, your total debt is $7,350,000. The figure was mentioned with such clarity that the guests were stunned. A collective gasp of surprise spread. More than $7 million. It was an enormous U.S. amount, impossible to pay for the who now had no job and no assets. And since you no longer have assets in your name, Mr. Zephaniah continued in a final tone, civil and criminal laws will be applied simultaneously. As soon as Mr. Zephaniah finished the sentence, the side doors of the ballroom burst open. This time it wasn't waiters who entered, but several men in suits with briefcases accompanied by uniformed police officers. It was the legal team from Lysandra's company. They walked quickly through the frightened guests toward the stage. The sound of the police boots sounded terrifying, signaling that this was no longer a simple domestic dispute, but a real law enforcement action. They, still on the stage floor, tried to crawl back, moving away from the approaching police. His face was wet with tears and sweat. He turned toward Vesper, begging for help. "Vesper, help me! Call your father, ask him to lend us some money," he pleaded desperately. But Vesper's reaction was completely different from what he expected, although very predictable for others. Vesper backed away from him as if he were a plague victim. She pushed away Thayer's hand when he tried to grab her dress. "Don't touch me!" she screamed hysterically. "I don't know anything. You're a fraud. You said you were rich. I don't want to carry your debts." Vesper took off her engagement ring, threw it in the face, and tried to jump off the stage. But her path was blocked by the hotel manager and several security guards who blocked her on the stairs. The hotel manager was holding a long bill. "Excuse me, Miss Vesper," the manager said firmly but still politely. "According to the reservation contract, your name appears as the secondary responsible party. If the primary party cannot pay, you cannot leave this place until this bill of $350 the reserve is settled. Otherwise, you will have to accompany us to the police station as a witness in a case of service fraud." Vesper's face turned whiter than her wedding dress. She screamed, cried, and begged to be let go, but the security guards continued to block her way. Meanwhile, 2 police officers were already next to Thayer. An officer read the arrest warrant. They was accused of embezzlement of company funds in his position and attempted fraud using a bad check. The officer took the limp hands, forced him up, and then placed cold metal handcuffs on both wrists. The click of the handcuffs echoed very loudly in Thayer's ears, the sound of the end of his freedom. They wailed. His pride was shattered. He looked toward the VIP table, seeking Lysandra's figure. He saw his ex-wife standing up slowly, adjusting her scarf that the air conditioning had slightly moved. They screamed Lysandra's name. "Landra, please help me. I was wrong. I was crazy. Lysandra, don't do this to me. We loved each other." His scream sounded pathetic, full of a late regret. But Lysandra didn't flinch. Her face remained calm, as if she were watching a stranger. She showed no sign of helping. She had given him too many opportunities in the last 5 years, and he had always wasted them. This was the karma Thayer had sown for himself, and now it was time to reap the storm. Lysandra made a slight bow to Mr. Zephaniah in a sign of respect. Then she turned her back to the stage, signaling that the show was over and that she had no interest in seeing the next act. The police began to lead the off the stage. The guests immediately pulled out their phones to record the shameful scene. Camera flashes burst in Thayer's swollen face and in Vesper's hysterical face. The next morning, both their faces would surely be on the front pages of the tabloids and viral on social media, with embarrassing headlines. They tried to hide his face by ducking his head, but it was useless. In the midst of the chaos, Mr. Zephaniah's phrase about the full indemnification clause kept echoing in his head like a curse, a phrase that had turned an arrogant director into a prisoner with a debt of millions of dollars. In a single night, he had fallen from the top of a skyscraper he had built on foundations of sand, and the impact against the ground was very painful. The chaos in the hotel ballroom reached a climax that no one could have imagined. The space, which should have been filled with happy laughter and romance, had been transformed into the scene of a loud and shameful incident. Sirens could be heard faintly from outside the hotel lobby, adding more tension to the already suffocating atmosphere. On the stage, Thayer was still struggling in the hands of 2 robust police officers. He screamed, cried, and pleaded in a stark contrast to the arrogant figure who had delivered a speech with confidence just minutes ago. His expensive groom suit was now wrinkled, his tie crooked, and his face was wet with a mixture of tears and sweat. He looked like a madman who had lost his mind, repeating phrases of denial, saying all this was just a nightmare. Meanwhile, Vesper at the foot of the stage stairs lived her own hell. She was surrounded by the hotel manager and several representatives of vendors who had appeared out of nowhere. Apparently, the news of Thayer's arrest and the freeze on his assets had spread very quickly among the hotel, staff and their partners, the head of catering, the florist, and even the sound system rental company, which hadn't yet received full payment, now surrounded Vesper, demanding immediate payment. Vesper screamed hysterically. The hem of her long wedding dress was stepped on by the shoes of the people surrounding her. Her thick makeup had run, and the black mascara ran down her cheeks in horrible black stripes like a ghost's tears. She tried to point at the shouting that she knew nothing about the money, but the creditors didn't care. Vesper's name was on the contract as a guarantor, and the law isn't interested in crocodile tears. In the midst of the chaos, Lysandra stood up slowly from her chair. Her movements were calm and calculated, as if she were in a different temporal dimension from the chaos surrounding her. Mr. Zephaniah stood by her side, offering protection in case of any possible violence, but Lysandra slightly raised her right hand, indicating she could handle it. She smoothed the folds of her black velvet dress, adjusted the position of the brooch on her chest, and began to walk toward the stage. Her steps were slow but firm. The guests who were busy recording the incident with their phones instinctively lowered their cameras and made way for her. Lysandra's aura at that moment was so strong that it radiated the dignity of a victor who doesn't need a claim to celebrate her victory. They, as they dragged him down the stage stairs, saw Lysandra approach. His red and swollen eyes flashed immediately with a false light of hope. He twisted, trying to free himself from the police to get closer to Lysandra. He thought that the woman who had once loved him so much and who had always forgiven his mistakes would soften upon seeing his current state. With a broken and pathetic voice, Thayer shouted his ex-wife's name, asked for her forgiveness, said he had been crazy, that Vesper had incited him, and that he still loved her. They lowered his pride to the maximum, prostrating himself on the cold marble floor despite having his hands handcuffed behind his back. He hoped Lysandra would ask the police to release him or at least pay his debts as she used to do. In the past, when he got into trouble with gambling or lifestyle debts, Lysandra stopped exactly 2 steps from the kneeling Thayer. She looked down at him through her long eyelashes. There was no anger on her face, only an empty and cold gaze, as if she were seeing a stranger she had never met before. Lysandra remembered all the insults Thayer had directed at her during their 5 years of marriage. She remembered how he had called her boring, how he had skillfully hidden his infidelities, and how he had subtly marginalized her in the company's social circles. All the bitter memories flashed through her mind, but strangely they no longer hurt. She only felt pity for how small the soul of the man in front of her was. "Lysandra, please pay his debt. I promise I'll pay you back later. I promise I'll change. Don't let the police take me." They pleaded with saliva and snot mixed in, a sight repulsive to anyone who saw him. The police officers holding him looked at Lysandra, waiting for her reaction. Would there be an intervention, or would a new drama unfold? Lysandra sighed briefly and then spoke. Her voice was soft but clearly audible in Thayer's ears. "There, for 5 years, I've always cleaned up your messes. I turned a blind eye when you took money for your whims. I stayed silent when you pretended to be the owner of my company. I gave you countless opportunities to mature and behave like an adult." She paused, letting her words sink in. "But today, you yourself chose your destiny. The signature on the divorce papers was your choice. This lavish party was also your choice. And that woman over there," Lysandra pointed to Vesper, "who was crying while being dragged by security, was also your choice. I'm done being your savior. It's time for you to learn to be a man, responsible for your own choices." Hearing those words, Fire's hope shattered. He realized Lysandra had truly closed her heart forever. She was no longer the submissive wife he could manipulate. They let out a loud lament, a sound of despair that echoed horribly. The police pulled him again, forcing him up and dragging him toward the side exit. They didn't stop looking back toward the firm figure of Lysandra until he disappeared behind the guarded double doors. After they took Thea away, Lysandra directed her gaze toward Vesper. Seeing them take Thea, Vesper panicked even more. She tried to free herself from the hotel manager's hands, but she had no strength. Seeing Lysandra looking at her, she immediately changed tactics from angry to pleading. "Mrs. Vandross, please help me. I knew nothing. They tricked me. I'm a victim too. As a woman, please have mercy on me." She pleaded with a piteous face, hoping that female solidarity would save her. Lysandra approached Vesper, looked at the expensive wedding dress she was wearing, bought with the company credit card that now formed part of the mountain of debt. Landra smiled very slightly, an almost imperceptible smile. She reached into her bag and pulled out a white envelope, the kind usually given to the bride and groom with gift money. Vesper's eyes sparkled upon seeing the envelope. She thought Lysandra would give her a check to settle the hotel bill and let her go free. Landra handed her the envelope. Vesper snatched it quickly, her hands trembling. Impatiently, she opened it, but her face paled instantly upon seeing the contents. The envelope was empty. There was no money or check, only a small note with a copy of the unpaid bill for the wedding dress. Lysandra had obtained the receipt from the boutique, another victim of Thayer's sweet promises. "You wanted a high-end lifestyle, didn't you, Vesper?" Lysandra said in a low voice, almost whispering in Vesper's ear. "You wanted to be on the same level as Thayer? Congratulations. Now you two really are on the same level. Both in debt, both facing legal processes, and both with nothing." Landra stepped back and looked at Vesper with compassion. "Enjoy what's left of the wedding cake, honey. It'll probably be the last delicious meal you taste before the prison food." Vesper was left jaw-dropped, speechless. Lysandra's words hit her harder than a physical slap. She realized she had been completely defeated. She had bet on the wrong horse, and now she had to pay the price. The hotel manager signaled security to take Vesper to the administration office for paperwork. With the police waiting for her there, Vesper was dragged sobbing through the guests who were once her high society friends. The same friends she had once bragged to were now busy recording her fall to gossip in their messaging groups. Vesper covered her face with the hem of her torn dress, unable to bear the shame. The ballroom began to empty slowly of the main drama. Only the guests remained, still frozen in their seats, shocked by the real spectacle they had just witnessed. Lysandra turned and approached Mr. Zephaniah again, who was waiting for her with a smile of pride. There were no victory cheers or celebration party. Lysandra only felt tired, but a tiredness of relief. She took her bag and walked with Mr. Zephaniah toward the main exit. The guests in her path bowed their heads in sign of respect this time, not out of formality, but out of genuine awe. Lysandra walked down that red carpet not as a bride, but as a queen who had just cleaned her palace of trash. She didn't look back again, leaving behind the remains of a $350 Zero party that was now only a horrible memory for a pair of indebted traders. A month after that tumultuous wedding night, the news of the lavish party that ended with handcuffs remained a hot topic in various media and digital platforms. The faces of Thier and Vesper vividly adorned the front pages of the tabloids and business magazines, but with a very different narrative from the one they had dreamed of. They became the symbol of the fall of a Yo-Ung, corrupt and greedy executive, while Vesper became the real-life example of a fatal hedonistic lifestyle. In-depth investigative reports revealed how they had embezzled company funds for years to finance his luxurious lifestyle and his infidelities. The total loss revealed by the audit was a fantastic figure that shocked the public. Behind the bars of the city's correctional center, Thier sat meditating in a corner of his small and suffocating cell. He no longer wore expensive suits or brand-name watches. His body was now covered by a worn orange prisoner's jumpsuit. His hair, once always impeccably styled with gel, was now disheveled and starting to grow out. His face had become gaunt and his eyes were sunken, surrounded by dark circles from lack of sleep. Every night, regret tormented him. He had lost everything: his position, his reputation, his wealth, and the woman who had truly loved him. His mother visited him once, but only to scold him and tell him that the entire family was ashamed of his actions. There was no defense or help from a competent lawyer because he had no money. He was completely alone, carrying a debt of millions of dollars that he didn't know how he would pay in his entire life. Vesper's fate was no less miserable. Although she wasn't detained as long as they, as her role was considered a passive participation in the embezzlement, Vesper faced a civil lawsuit that left her completely bankrupt. All the luxury items she had received from the bags, shoes, jewelry, even the car that wasn't yet paid for, were confiscated by the authorities and the finance company as evidence and seized assets. Vesper was evicted from her rental apartment for not paying the rent. Her high society friends distanced themselves, blocked her number, and socially repudiated her. Now Vesper lives in a tiny room on the outskirts of Atlanta, working a low-level job in a small online shop, pursued by the party's creditors who continued to demand full payment for the catering. The beauty and luxury she once adored had disappeared without a trace, eclipsed by the shadow of debt and shame. Meanwhile, in a green area far from the city noise, a very different atmosphere was developing. A large building of warm but modern architecture rose majestically. On the plaque by the main door, it read, "The Vandross Foundation Children's Home." On the green lawn, orphaned children ran and played happily, dressed in clean and decent school uniforms. From the building's terrace, Lysandra watched them with a sincere smile on her lips. Her face seemed much more alive and radiant than a month before. The heavy weight that had oppressed her heart had completely disappeared. She wore an elegant business outfit that combined professionalism and simplicity. Mr. Zephaniah came out of the building's main door with a folder of monthly reports. He approached Lysandra and handed it to her. "This month's financial report, Madam Chairwoman. After the management restructuring and the removal of the company pests, our profits have increased by 30%. Investors are trusting the Vandross Group again," Mr. Zephaniah said with a smile of satisfaction. He was proud to see his niece taking total control with wisdom. Lysandra took the folder, glanced at it for a moment, and nodded with joy. Managing the company wasn't as terrifying as Thier had made her believe. With honesty and the right team, everything went smoothly. "Thank you, Mr. Zephaniah. Without your help, I'd probably still be trapped in that illusion of fear," Lysandra said sincerely. She closed the folder and looked at the blue and clear sky. "Allocate 50% of this month's profits to the remodeling of the girls' dormitory in the back and to educational scholarships for these children until university. Put the rest in the company coffers as expansion capital." Mr. Zephaniah nodded in agreement. "A wise decision. Oh, by the way, the lawyer just contacted us. The court's verdict on thee has come out. 12 years in prison and the obligation to restitute the assets. The old house where you lived has officially become your personal property again," Mr. Zephaniah reported in a neutral tone, a mere formal report. Lysandra went silent for a moment, hearing Thier's name and that of the house. There was a bit of nostalgia, but not of longing. It was a relief that that dark chapter of her life had truly ended. "Sell the house, Mr. Zephaniah. I don't need the memories of that place. Donate the proceeds to the construction of a community center for our local outreach project. I want to purify all traces of that past into something beneficial. Lysandra walked toward the courtyard where her new black sedan was parked. The driver opened the door for her politely. Before getting in, Lysandra turned to look once more at the children's home building. She saw the children smiling with innocence, living simple lives but full of love. She realized something important. True happiness didn't reside in parties of hundreds of thousands of dollars, in the ostentation of status on social media, or in the false recognition of others. True happiness resided in peace of mind, in preserved self-esteem, and in the capacity to be useful to others. Lysandra entered the car. The cool air from the climate control greeted her. She leaned back in the seat. Her back now felt light. She took out her phone, opened the photo gallery, and deleted an old album that contained her wedding photos with Thea. Every photo disappeared from the digital memory along with the pain disappearing from her heart. She put down the phone and looked out the window at the straight road ahead. "To the headquarters, please," she ordered softly. The sedan pulled away from the children's home slowly, making its way through the busy city streets toward the skyscraper where Lysandra would preside, over her first board meeting as the recognized and sole owner. The sun shone brightly on the road before her, as if the universe were blessing her new steps. Lysandra smiled, this time a smile for herself. She knew her life had just begun, and the greatest lesson she had learned from all this was that sometimes a woman's silence doesn't mean she's weak or naive, but that she's planning a strategy to win the war without needing many words. Did you like the story, and which city are you listening from? Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.